The sun hung high over the city of Umuchu, casting its golden glow over the busy streets and vibrant market. Traders called out to passers-by, selling everything from fresh vegetables to fine fabrics. Among the bustling crowd, a woman dressed in simple clothing walked quietly, her eyes taking in the scene around her. She was Ekenma, the goddess who had blessed this land long ago. But today, she was no longer seen as a goddess. No one in Umuchu recognized her. She had taken the form of an ordinary woman to see how her people treated outsiders, foreign traders who had come to the market only to face cruelty and injustice at the hands of the local market women. Ekenma's heart ached as she watched the scene unfold before her, unnoticed by the very people she had once blessed. The market was alive with energy, but beneath the surface, there was tension. The locals, especially the market women, were wary of foreigners. They saw them as a threat, and their fear had turned to greed and cruelty. Ekenma knew she had to act, but she would wait, watching, learning, and silently preparing for the moment when she would reveal her true nature. Years before, Umuchu had been a barren land, its soil dry and unforgiving. The people struggled to survive until Ekenma, moved by their suffering, blessed the land with her divine power. The rivers began to flow, the crops grew plentiful, and the village thrived. In return, the people worshipped her, building shrines and offering prayers in gratitude. But as the years passed and the village grew wealthy, the people's hearts changed. They became proud and forgetful, believing that their success was of their own making. They no longer visited Ekenma's shrine, and soon they forgot the goddess who had blessed them. The market women, in particular, became greedy, using their power to exploit others, especially the foreign traders who had come to share in Umuchu's prosperity. Ekenma watched from afar, her heart heavy with sorrow. She had given them everything, yet they had forgotten her. And now, she had returned to see for herself the extent of their corruption. The foreigners were easy to spot in the marketplace. Their accents were different, their clothes more worn, and their faces full of hope for a better life. They had come to Umuchu with goods from faraway lands, hoping to trade and build a future in this prosperous village. But instead of being welcomed, they were met with suspicion and hostility. The market women, led by a fierce woman named Neka, had made it their mission to make life difficult for these outsiders. They charged them exorbitant prices, pushed them out of the best spots in the market, and spread rumors to ensure that no one would buy from them. Ekenma watched as one such foreigner, a young man with kind eyes, was cheated out of his money. His goods were taken from him, and when he protested, the market women laughed in his face. Ekenma's hands tightened into fists. She had seen enough. It was time to act. To understand the full extent of the injustice, Ekenma decided to live among the people as one of them. She donned the clothes of a poor woman and entered the market as a simple trader. Her wares were modest, handmade baskets and dried herbs, but they were enough to earn her a place among the market women. The moment she set up her stall, the market women began to bully her. They accused her of being a foreigner, even though she spoke their language and followed their customs. They laughed at her wares, calling them worthless, and pushed her to the edge of the market, away from the best customers. Ekenma bore their cruelty in silence, but her heart burned with anger. How had these women become so blind to their own corruption? How had they forgotten the goddess who had given them everything? But she would not reveal herself yet. She needed to see more, to understand the full depth of their greed. Ekenma, now in her human form, set up her modest stall at the far end of the market, hoping to blend in with the other traders. Her stall was simple, woven baskets, dried herbs, and handmade trinkets. But even before she could settle in, the market women, led by Neka, began to eye her with disdain. "Who is this one? Where does she think she's from?" Neka sneered, her arms crossed in front of her chest. She was the self-proclaimed leader of the market women, known for her sharp tongue and iron grip over the marketplace. The other women laughed in agreement, their eyes glinting with mischief. "Another foreigner trying to sell her useless goods here," shouted one of Neka's closest allies, Adama. The other women chuckled, mocking Ekenma's wares without even looking at them closely. Ekenma remained calm, her eyes focused on setting up her stall. She had lived among humans long enough to know their hearts could be dark, especially when driven by greed and fear. She said nothing as the women continued to taunt her, choosing instead to observe their behavior. But their cruelty didn't stop at words. Later that afternoon, when Ekenma had finally arranged her goods and a few curious passers-by approached, Neka and her group took action. They elbowed potential customers out of the way and purposely knocked over Ekenma's baskets. The herbs she had painstakingly collected scattered across the dusty ground. "Oops. My hand slipped," Neka said with mock innocence, her lips curled into a smirk. "Maybe your goods aren't meant to be here. Maybe you should leave this market, outsider." The other market women laughed, their voices harsh and filled with malice. Ekenma bent down slowly to gather her herbs, her expression calm despite the injustice she was facing. But inside, a storm was brewing. The disrespect she could tolerate, but the heartless way they treated anyone they deemed an outsider was more than she could bear. Ekenma's silence was not one of defeat, it was the patience of a goddess watching over those who had lost their way. She knew she could bring them to their knees with a single thought, but she wanted to give them the chance to redeem themselves. However, redemption seemed far from their minds. They continued to mock her and the few foreigners who dared to come to the market. Every day, Ekenma watched as they overcharged the strangers, pushed them out of the good trading spots, and sometimes outright sabotaged their goods. The cruelty was not just aimed at Ekenma, it was a systemic culture of bullying that had taken over the once blessed market. As the days passed, Ekenma became a silent witness to the mistreatment of others. The foreigners, many of whom came from neighboring villages and cities, were frequently humiliated. Some had their goods stolen or damaged by the market women, while others were forced to leave the market altogether because they couldn't compete with the locals' manipulation. One day, an old man from a distant village set up a small stall beside Ekenma. His hand shook with age as he laid out his wares, beautifully carved wooden figures and bowls. The craftsmanship was excellent, but Neka and her group quickly descended on him. "Old man, what do you think you're doing here? This isn't your place." Neka barked, standing over the frail man. He tried to explain, his voice quivering, but before he could finish, one of the women knocked over his carvings. Ekenma could no longer stay silent. She stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Leave him be. He's done nothing to you." Neka whirled around, her eyes narrowing at Ekenma. "And who do you think you are to speak to me like that? You're just as much of an outsider as he is," she spat. "I am no outsider. I belong to this land as much as any of you," Ekenma replied, her tone firm. Her words were true in a way the women couldn't understand, for she had been there before any of them had taken their first breath. Neka laughed, brushing off Ekenma's defense. "Go back to your stall and stay out of this if you know what's good for you." But as Neka turned to continue harassing the old man, something strange happened. The sky, which had been clear and bright just moments before, suddenly darkened. Thick clouds rolled in, and a cold wind whipped through the market, scattering loose papers and dust. The market women paused, their laughter fading as they looked around uneasily. They couldn't understand how the weather had changed so quickly. Ekenma remained still, her eyes fixed on Neka. "Consider this your warning," she said softly, though her words carried an unexpected weight. The wind picked up, growing stronger and colder. Neka and her group shivered, their once confident expressions replaced by uncertainty. But Neka, stubborn and proud, refused to back down. "It's just a little wind," she shouted, trying to laugh it off. "Don't think you scare us, outsider." Ekenma said nothing more. She returned to her stall, leaving the market women unsettled by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Days passed, but the memory of that eerie wind lingered in the minds of the market women. They tried to convince themselves it was a coincidence, that Ekenma had nothing to do with it. Neka especially was determined to assert her dominance. The bullying continued, though with slightly more caution, as the women cast suspicious glances at Ekenma whenever they passed her stall. Ekenma, for her part, continued to watch in silence. She spoke kindly to the foreigners and offered help where she could, but she never revealed her true identity. She wanted to see if the market women would change on their own. Could they, after all their greed and cruelty, find their way back to the kindness and generosity that had once defined this village? But Neka and her group showed no signs of changing. In fact, their bullying grew worse with time. They grew bolder, testing Ekenma's patience with every passing day. Yet she waited, hoping they would realize the error of their ways. One evening, after the market had closed, Ekenma walked through the empty stalls. The sky above was streaked with the colors of dusk, and the air was still. As she walked, she heard the distant sounds of laughter and celebration coming from the village center. The market women were enjoying their riches, blissfully unaware of the storm that was coming their way. Ekenma stopped in the middle of the marketplace and looked up at the darkening sky. Her patience was wearing thin, but still, she hesitated. She had given them so much, the blessings of the land, the prosperity of the market. How had they become so lost? But as she stood there, the wind began to pick up once more. This time, it was not a gentle breeze, but a cold, sharp gust that rattled the empty stalls and sent shivers down Ekenma's spine. The goddess knew that her time of waiting was coming to an end. The next morning, the market was abuzz with gossip. Strange things had happened overnight, stalls had been overturned, goods had gone missing, and several of the market women had reported disturbing dreams. They whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of it all. "Do you think it's that woman?" Adama asked, her voice low as she glanced in Ekenma's direction. "The one who stood up to Neka?" "Nonsense," Neka scoffed, though there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "She's no one. Just another outsider." But the other women weren't so sure. They had all felt the strange wind, seen the sky darken. And now, with the unsettling events of the night, they couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching them. Ekenma, of course, knew exactly what was happening. She had given them a taste of her power, just enough to unsettle them. It was a warning, a reminder that the land they stood on was blessed, and those blessings could just as easily be taken away. Yet, despite the unease in the market, Neka refused to back down. She rallied the women, insisting that they carry on as usual, that no outsider could intimidate them. But Ekenma's patience was running out, and soon they would learn that there were consequences for their actions. Despite the eerie warnings that unsettled the marketplace, Neka and her group's greed only intensified. They convinced themselves that the strange occurrences were mere coincidences. Neka, driven by pride, pushed the women to maintain their bullying ways. The wealth they had accumulated blinded them to any sense of morality. "Why should we care about these outsiders?" Neka would boast to the others. "They're lucky we even let them step foot in our market. If anything, they owe us for the privilege." The other market women nodded, agreeing with her words, although some secretly harbored doubts. Yet, none dared speak against Neka's authority. The foreigners continued to face exploitation, charged outrageous fees, their goods sabotaged, and their trading spots taken over by Neka's inner circle. Ekenma, who remained disguised as a humble trader, could feel the growing unease in the air. Her patience was thinning, and she knew the time was coming when she would have to reveal her true self. But for now, she observed, her heart heavy with the knowledge that these women, whom she had once blessed, had lost all sense of fairness and kindness. The foreigners, however, weren't the only ones suffering. Local villagers had started to complain too. Prices in the market were skyrocketing, driven by the market women's greed. The people who once flourished under Ekenma's blessings were now being oppressed by their own. Ekenma's silent rage began to simmer. One fateful morning, the atmosphere in the marketplace was eerily quiet. The sky, though clear, held attention as if the winds themselves were waiting for something to unfold. Ekenma had spent weeks enduring the cruelty of the market women, witnessing the injustice with each passing day. Today, however, she had reached the end of her patience. As the market bustled with its usual activity, Neka and her group gathered to plot their next move against yet another group of foreign traders who had just arrived. But before they could enact their plan, something extraordinary happened. A sudden gust of wind swept through the market, sending stalls and goods tumbling. The market women clutched at their headscarves, shouting in confusion. The wind howled fiercely, stronger than any storm they had ever witnessed. And then, in the center of the marketplace, where Ekenma's humble stall had stood, she rose to her full height. Her simple clothes transformed into a flowing robe of shimmering light. Her eyes, once gentle, now glowed with divine power. The market women froze, terror seizing their hearts. They had no idea who they had been bullying all this time. "Ekenma!" Neka gasped, her voice trembling. She recognized the figure before her, the goddess who had once blessed their village. The other women fell to their knees, their pride shattered as they realized the truth. The goddess they had forgotten, the very one who had made their village prosperous, had been walking among them all along. And they had mistreated her. Though many of the women were paralyzed by fear, Nneka's arrogance hadn't fully abandoned her. She rose shakily to her feet, her eyes narrowing as she faced Ekenma. "So what if you're the goddess?" Nneka spat, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. "You left us. You haven't done anything for this village in years. We built this market ourselves, and we have the right to run it how we see fit." The market women gasped at Nneka's audacity. To challenge the goddess directly was unthinkable. Ekenma's gaze remained fixed on Nneka, but her expression softened into something like pity. "You speak of rights," she said, her voice echoing with power, "yet you trample on the rights of others. I blessed this village with abundance, yet you have turned that blessing into a tool for oppression." Nneka's defiance faltered, but she stubbornly crossed her arms. "We were only trying to protect what's ours. And in doing so, you have harmed the very people I blessed this land for," Ekenma replied, her voice growing sterner. "Greed and pride have blinded you, Nneka. You have forgotten what it means to share and to be kind." As Ekenma spoke, the ground beneath Nneka's feet trembled slightly, as though the earth itself was responding to the goddess's anger. The other market women began to panic, begging for forgiveness. Ekenma could no longer hold back her divine judgment. She had waited, given them chances to change, but now it was clear they were beyond redemption, especially Nneka. The storm that had been brewing in the skies above finally broke loose. Thunder rolled ominously, and the heavens wept rain that pelted the market relentlessly. The market women scattered in fear, running to find shelter. Stalls collapsed under the heavy winds, and the marketplace, once full of activity, was reduced to chaos. Ekenma's power was not done, though. Her anger took a more visible form. The ground cracked beneath Nneka's feet, and the trees that lined the marketplace bent as if bowing to the goddess. The river that ran through Umuchu dried up in an instant, leaving behind a barren, cracked riverbed. Nneka, now drenched and trembling, finally realized the magnitude of her mistake. The prosperity of Umuchu was tied directly to Ekenma's blessings, and those blessings had been withdrawn. Over the next few weeks, Umuchu began to wither. The once thriving market was now a ghost of its former self. Without the river to water the crops, the fields turned to dust. The wealth that had flowed through the marketplace dried up, just as the river had. The villagers, who had once looked up to the market women with respect and fear, now saw them as the cause of their misfortune. They whispered among themselves, blaming Nneka and her group for angering the goddess. The foreigners who had once been bullied were gone, taking their trade and goods elsewhere. Ekenma remained in the background, watching as the village she had once loved fell into ruin. It broke her heart to see what had become of Umuchu, but she knew that this was the consequence of unchecked greed and injustice. One day, as the village continued its slow decline, Ekenma appeared once more in the marketplace. This time, she did not come in disguise. Her divine form was visible to all, her presence a reminder of the power she held. The remaining market women, those who had not fled in shame, knelt before her, begging for forgiveness. Nneka, however, stayed silent, her pride keeping her from speaking even as the village crumbled around her. Ekenma spoke to the women and the few remaining villagers who had gathered to watch. You were given a chance to live in abundance, to share in the blessings of the land. Instead, you chose greed. This is the price of your choices. But I am merciful. If you change your ways, if you learn to be kind and just, the blessings may return. The villagers murmured among themselves, eager for redemption. But Nneka remained silent, her face set in stubborn defiance. As Ekenma turned to leave, Nneka finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "I don't believe you," she said. "We don't need your blessings. We can rebuild this village ourselves, without your help." The villagers gasped, horrified by Nneka's audacity. Ekenma turned back to her, her expression unreadable. "Very well," Ekenma said softly. "The choice is yours." With that, she disappeared, leaving the marketplace in silence. The storm had passed, but the consequences of Nneka's pride remained. The village of Umuchu hung in the balance, its future uncertain. Would the people learn from their mistakes and embrace kindness, or would Nneka's pride lead them to further ruin?